Hello and welcome to the Beyond Biotech podcast number 96. I'm Jim Cornell and this is the weekly podcast from Labiotech. June is Myasthenia gravis Awareness Month, and so we thought it would be a good opportunity to see what's happening with respect to tackling the disease. It's a chronic autoimmune disorder where antibodies destroy the communication between nerves and muscle, and that results in weakness of the skeletal muscles. It especially affects the voluntary muscles of the eyes, mouth, throat and limbs, and it's most frequent in women from the ages of 20 to 30 and men aged 50 and older. To talk about the disease and how it is being treated, we had a conversation with Dana Vigier, head of Central, Eastern and Northern Europe at Alexion. All right. Hi, Dana. I wonder if you could give me a bit of background on what you do.
I'm VP heading up the Central and Northern European countries for Alexion for about a year now. I used to be a doctor, GP by training, worked in pharma for ages. The last 8 years probably in oncology, and then I joined AstraZeneca in oncology, by the way.
All right. How are you finding it so far?
Oh, I find it fascinating. Rare diseases is a very special space, very, very special space and very emotional space, but also, sort of taking us back to realities of how come that we can still have patients who take 5 years to diagnostic. That's the former doctor that speaks here. And the fascinating part is this translation of science really into medicine for like 7,000 rare diseases is like a huge number, multiplying a very small number of people suffering from each of those and making it a very difficult game for doctors. So I find it absolutely amazing. And I think Alexion is an amazingly positioned company for that.
As you mentioned that you were previously a doctor, are a lot of these diseases very difficult to diagnose?
They are very difficult to diagnose. And you know what? When you consider that there are 400 million people around the world who are suffering from about 7,000 different rare diseases, right? And about 90% of those have absolutely no therapeutic solution anyway. And most of them, but not all, are genetic. And we don't know much about them. Is a hugely complex area for multiple reasons. Complex area, first of all, to sort of understand the physiology, the pathophysiology of the disease. Second is to try and obviously develop drugs. So the R&D process is extremely difficult in rare diseases. Then it is difficult to diagnose for a poor GP, as I used to be, because they present in multiple non-specific forms. So you will have a person coming with very non-specific symptoms, and we're trained to go towards the most prevalent diseases. So if somebody comes to a doctor and just sort of signals fatigue, before thinking about myasthenia gravis, for instance, you're going to think about 10 other things that are much more common. And that is the other element. So after difficult R&D, very difficult diagnostic, and then the whole system, the whole healthcare system in all our Western countries, by the way, certainly in mine, is not necessarily built for that. So the referral system, the expertise centers, the guidelines, the value assessment, the access to drugs, nothing is built for them. So there is a lot of work and collaborative work to be done across all stakeholders at each and every step there.
Could you give me a little bit of a background on myasthenia gravis?
Totally so. So myasthenia gravis is one of the diseases that Alexion is focused on. And it's one of those chronic progressive diseases. And it's an autoimmune neuromuscular disease. So the problem at the end of the day, as you certainly know, is at the neuromuscular junction, you need a neurotransmitter to be able to sort of actually get the muscle to contract. And there is a point in time in this disease where basically there is a disruption there. and muscles do not contract anymore. It just affects approximately 20 people in 100,000, which is not an ultra rare disease, but it's still a very typical rare disease, obviously. For reasons we don't know, it affects mostly women before their 40s and men mostly after their 60s. And again, they present with quite non-specific and surprising symptoms. Slurred speech, choking, first with problems with the eye muscles, the eyelids drop. Shortness of breath is the more severe area. And then when it starts affecting, as you might imagine, the breathing muscles, the chokes. That's when it starts getting really serious and then really dangerous. And then you have those myasthenic crises that take people to hospital, basically, and intensive care. And that basically is what you really don't want to happen. So it's this whole range of symptoms and evolution that defines myasthenia gravis. And basically, there is, if I go quickly on that, about 80% of people have an acetylcholine receptor antibody. So it's an autoimmune antibody, so something that turns against something in your own immune system, that turns against your own protein, your own enzymes, and destroys them. So that is the core of the reason why Alexion has expanded its development, very difficult development, in this particular area as well, because it exploits the principle of the complement system. And the complement is one of the multiple elements of our innate immune systems.
What's the prognosis for somebody that has been diagnosed with the condition?
Basically, the condition can evolve over many years, many years. And you'll have most of people who are after a few years until they get diagnosed. But once they're diagnosed, they will respond to relatively traditional therapies, if you want, like mestinon, an acetylcholine receptor activator. They will respond to corticosteroids or to immunosuppressants. But then you'll have about 10 to 15% of patients, basically, who actually do not respond to that, do not respond anymore to that. And that is when they get into this risk of myasthenic crisis. And we go then to the second level medications, which will basically, for instance, include the complement, the C5 medication. So where Alexion sort of opened up the trail back in 2007 with the first sort of complement 5 inhibitor, which was Soliris, and then went into Ultomiris later on, which is a long-acting one to protect people on a longer term. And basically that, again, as you might imagine, acts in terms of blocking, inhibiting this excessive complement activation. Do you know why it's called complement? It basically, so this thing is, what's a complement basically? It's a system of about 50 plasma proteins that activate each other like a domino. And they complement, in a way, our antibodies, which need this complement to basically kill the microbes. And by extension, they will kill anything that is perceived as being non-self, so that your body doesn't recognize anymore as self, as being self. And that the complement will actually, at the end of the day, will be marking them for destruction. And if that mechanism goes wild and is not inhibited anymore, that's, for instance, when it destroys acetylcholine enzymes and will get your myasthenia gravis just worse and worse. So giving that complement, that's a C5 inhibition, which is the terminal. When you have that domino effect, it inhibits the last bit of it. So it stops the whole event from actually destroying the cell. So it's a difficult disease to treat, but all these diseases are.
The current treatments, how effective are those, and how do they work?
So there are multiple mechanisms of action. So as I said, basically when you have the guidelines, the current guidelines are very much going first to relatively traditional and historical medicines like mestinon, which allows acetylcholine to remain in the neuromuscular junction. Most people react well to that for quite a long time. Other treatments are corticosteroids. As you know, corticosteroids inhibit inflammation, so they stop the inflammation. Immunosuppressant agents like Cellcept, Imuran, or whatever. So these are like all kinds of different ways of attacking the immune system at the very beginning, at one basic level, I would say. But then you'll have these new treatment, much more sophisticated, I would say, like the C5 inhibitors, starting with Soliris, eculizumab, which was FDA approved already back in 2007, but now Ultomiris approved in 2018, and which is this long-acting inhibition. You block the last moment, the last element of the complement domino, and do not allow it to eat up the enzyme. But it's not the only one. There are others, obviously. So argenx has another drug approved, which is Vyvgart. Then there is a Bristigo approved as well for the treatment of GMG. So it's just a lot of science and a lot of companies at the end of the day who are now following the path that has been opened there on this C5 inhibition and this particular element of the immune system.
Do all of the drugs work in a similar way?
Some are slightly different. Some are adding up. So as you probably know now that you haven't been interviewing and discussing with so many people working in this area, I mean, immunology is probably one of the most complex areas. So our immunological system is so incredibly complex that you can tackle multiple different cascades, if you want, of activation. So most of them will now follow, will follow this path of the complement inhibition because it is it has been proven to be a very effective path. But then, for instance, even Alexion now, so we just got FDA, EMA, and Japan approval for Voidea, which is a factor D. Now, what is factor D? Factor D inhibition is one, again, element that will actually add on to the complement C5 inhibition to strengthen that inhibition even more so. So you will have a lot of pathways, but once we open up one of those pathways in the immune sort of system, most next drugs will actually look into that and try and work as much as possible on it until another path is open.
What kind of R&D is happening in the field?
There is a lot of these efforts of trying to work around the complement system, but not only. Now, there are new areas as well, which is, for instance, you will have the B-cell depletion treatments that we are involved in as well, neonatal FC receptor antagonists. We also there is a huge trend in T-cell directed treatments. That's another element of the immunological action in a completely different area. Obviously, companies like Janssen are evaluating medications like libocalimab. Roche is investigating satralizumab. Regeneron is investigating pozelimab. I mean, there's a number of drugs there. And that is also a testimony of this, I would say, this incredibly difficult way to develop these drugs, because it takes a lot of effort to find these patients, to be able to treat these patients properly, to standardize development in these patients. So just as an example, if you want, in terms of doing R&D, the importance of getting the patient insight and understanding truly the dynamic of the disease from the patient is absolutely critical. And that's when you sort of, just to give you a benchmark, if you want, when you work in oncology, as in R&D in oncology, as I used to for a number of years, you'll have MRI or scans that will absolutely tell you that tumor diminished or did not diminish. And that's very simple, very objective, very quick to identify. Not that the general symptomatology of cancer is not important, but at the end of the day, it's about shrinking up that tumor. In diseases like GMG, there is nothing completely objective that you can base on. Everything is in the patient's expression of disease, of symptomatology, of problems. And that is incredibly difficult to standardize. And this is one of the things that we're very keen to work on. This is why, when you ask me how it is with Alexion nowadays, I think that this is one of the things, that there are two things I'm fascinated about. One is the science in Alexion, and one is I've hardly seen so much patient focus and listening. And I understand now why, because this is the truly only way to sort of move forward with effective therapies. And let me tell you, the example for that, for me, that was an eye-opener, really. We did in Switzerland, which is one of the countries I'm looking after, we did in Switzerland a collaborative study involving a survey, involving both patients and doctors in terms of assessing the symptoms of the given patients. And I'm still very impressed with two results. There are many results, obviously, but there are two results that I'm very impressed with. One is, and you asked me about the effectiveness or the efficacy of the treatments. One is that about 83% of patients still report significant symptoms even under treatment. I mean, under current traditional treatment, right? That is quite staggering, I would say. I mean, one would wonder, why don't they move on to the next level of treatment? And then the second part, if you want, is quite interesting. It is about 43% of patients disagreed with the assessment of their disease that was done by their doctors. So they felt that that did not adequately reflect the size and the depth of their symptoms. And that was truly a wake-up call, and to me specifically, as a former doctor. And I think that that is the one thing that we need to work with as well in R&D, but not only, also in the way that we are actually working with and collaborating with doctors, with value assessors across the countries, with reimbursement systems, to make sure that this vision is actually truly embedded and not diminished, I would say, or not understood. I'll give you another example there, which did strike me in terms of questions. There are two types of questionnaire, let's put it this way, to assess the disease in GMG. And one is patient reported, and one is physician assessed. And they both have, for instance, a question around swallowing, because choking is an important symptom. And there is one question which is, do you have troubles swallowing? And basically the patient in the study asked this way, said, well, no, I'm fine. And then in the patient reported one, there is also a question that is the complement question, which is, when was the last time you had a stick? And then the patient answers, well, no, I'm not having sticks. I can't chew them. So this is an eye-opener. It's like little stories tell us much more than a lot of studies. We need to listen more and better to patients.
Could you tell me a little bit about the company and what you're doing to tackle myasthenia gravis?
Alexion was founded in 1992 in Connecticut, and now 30 years later is employing about 3,800 people, talking about the R&D, talking about the rapid expansion across the world, and delivers slightly less than $8 billion a year. And what that success was made of is really, it started with the complement system, so particularly with this C5, so translating this biology into an actual drug. Soliris was launched in 2007. Then there was a second launch aside from C5. So this company was not only a C5 company. It did launch the aspartase alpha, which is called Strensiq, in genetic hypophosphatemia, 2008. Then Alexion acquired Silent Jiva, 2015, and launched Kanuma for LAL deficiency, yet another rare disease, and developed progressively and fastly about 4 different indications for the C5 complement inhibitors, Soliris and Ultomiris, which are PNH in paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria, AHUS, atypical hemolytic uremic syndrome, NMOSD, neuromyelitis optica disorder, and last but not least, the GMG we're talking about, so the general myasthenia gravis. And then in, July 21, Alexion was actually acquired by AstraZeneca and now is striving to develop massively and use also the AstraZeneca muscle to be able to expand access to rare diseases in new countries. So it's expanding its geography massively. And I didn't tell you that actually there was an interesting, it's not finished there, because in 2023, because that is part that fascinates me as well. So 2023, the company acquired actually Pfizer's preclinical gene therapy portfolio. And that is going to be the next chapter of the R&D and basically the development part. So gene therapy development, very strongly focusing on rare diseases from here onwards, and other types of deals acquiring from other biotechs like Amolyt, for instance, this year.
Are you working currently on any clinical trials related to GMG?
We do have several clinical trials actually in GMG, some already still on Soliris and Ultomiris, but also on Alexion 2050, which is an investigational therapy. And as also discussed, I told you about the Voidea, which is in full launch right now. So the factor D that comes with the complement. And we now also work in key areas as, like research on GMG, on B cell depletion treatments, on T cell directed treatments. So there are multiple areas. So yes, this is a continuous active area of development.
June is GMG month. What is the importance of having awareness months in some of these rare diseases?
Yes, we know, of course, that there are a lot of awareness days and months lately in many diseases and in many areas, by the way, not only in diseases. But I think raising awareness of GMG is critically important. First of all, for GMG patients, those who know themselves and who ignore themselves, for their families, for their carers. And as I personally believe that maybe the biggest importance of this awareness month is raising awareness towards healthcare practitioners across the GPs, like I used to be. As I said, it is so important at this stage to make sure that we collectively, by this awareness effort, but not only, can really try and shorten this far too long diagnostic errands for patients. 5 years on average for rare diseases in general and GMG as well to a diagnostic is not acceptable, I would say, in our systems. Awareness is the first and foremost critical path. We can think of many others. We can think of digital. We're working a lot in that. We can think of artificial intelligence. We are exploring any single possible route to collaborate with other stakeholders in the healthcare systems, because we can't do it all, obviously, but certainly collaborate and create coalitions to make sure that we use the technology that is available to help and support patient groups and individual patients, basically, in GMG and in the other rare diseases we're looking at.
Would improving diagnosis and getting earlier diagnosis improve the prognosis for people with GMG?
It would certainly improve their lives. That's our mission, is to transform rare disease people's lives. Not all diseases are lethal, so you're not going to die necessarily, or if treated, you're not going to die later. But basically, these are chronic diseases. Chronic diseases means living for years with a disease. Your quality of life, the way you're living, and of course, on the other hand as well, the burden on the healthcare system. But first and foremost, the quality of life of these patients and their carers is the most important action that we can sort of undertake to make sure that we transform their lives. So yes, when you see basically the responses of and the quotes of these GMG patients whose daily activities are completely hampered. They just don't do anything. I mean, when you listen to them, it's like even cutting a slice of bread is, well, forget about it. I'm not doing it. It's exhausting. And I'm not even talking about the myasthenia crisis. I'm just talking about the everyday symptoms making life unbearable for these patients. So yes, having a diagnostic earlier allows treatment earlier. That is the most important part.
And with the current drugs in development and the clinical trials, are you hopeful that people with GMG will be able to live better lives in the future?
Well, we definitely believe that even with the existing drugs. So this is one of the reasons behind the success of Alexion, for instance, is the fact that current drugs are already seeing a transformation in people's lives. And that is truly what motivates us every day. Of course, we need more. Of course, we will do more. And this is what we do in R&D. When we went as well from a very efficacious Soliris, for instance, to a very efficacious Ultomiris, but which on top of Soliris increased even further the quality of life of people because of this long-acting treatment. So they didn't need to have it so often and just they could rely on the effective treatment for much longer. These are incremental steps towards not only this efficiency, but also maximizing, that's our aim, again, transforming patients' lives, making sure that we can hear them and get even better in the treatment to get their lives better.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about that we didn't cover?
I think we discussed a lot about GMG, and this is great. And I think that it's one of the important parts of our focus in R&D, in commercialization, in ensuring access. And that is probably the only last thing I would like to say is how important, and this is what my teams across the countries in Europe are doing every day, is the importance of truly partnering every single day with patient advocacies, healthcare providers, payers, and even on a broader side, the local societies, to make sure that whatever we do and we come up with from our R&D, these drugs only work if they reach every patient and no patient is left behind. So our job is to work collaboratively to make sure that patients do have access to these drugs as soon as possible. So that keeps us awake at night.
I know there are an awful lot of awareness days and months, especially this time of year, but the organisers of them do some great work increasing awareness, raising funds and coordinating research. So let's hope there are some more major advancements in tackling myasthenia gravis soon, as well as for some other rare diseases. Don't forget to check out the latest news and articles over at Labiotech.eu, and I hope wherever in the world you are, you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Beyond Biotech.